Hi everyone, thanks for your attention. So we're just going to open the space now with the first chapter from the Quran, Surah Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. تمثيلة.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Greetings of peace and mercy of Allah, of God upon you. I'm Tamsila. I'm one of the co-founders and trustees of Inclusive Mosque Initiative, and I'm very honoured to welcome you all today to this seminar. This is the fourth in the series of Raise Your Gaze seminars by Inclusive Mosque Initiative. And the mosque itself is attempting to create an inclusive space, a place of justice, and we believe that these values are central expression for the practice of Islam, and that is what Raise Your Gaze is about, inclusion and justice. So today, the topic we're exploring is on gender variance and sexual diversity in Islam, what this looks like in the Quran and in Islamic practice, both historically and contemporary, and what we need to do to make our space more thoughtful and accepting of this today. So this is particularly important for Inclusive Mosque Initiative to be doing this work because of our overarching aims, to think about what kind of space that we are creating and the demand for the space that we are attempting to create as a mosque, as a community, and so for that space also to be radically inclusive and what that means. And so we need to know from all parts of our community, including our queer, LGBTQI plus community, what that means for them and what our allies can also do in committing to providing and achieving that space. So in the hall, there are some post-it notes scattered around. Hopefully you'll see them. If you don't, they're on the table. They're on the table outside, actually. They were in the hall. They moved. And we'd like you to write down your thoughts that you're willing to share throughout the day on the post-it notes and stick them up on the walls, and there will be signs, hopefully, around the space where you can put them up. And the idea of that is that we want to gather your thoughts, your ideas through the day about what resources, what spaces would be inclusive to you for IMI to provide. We may not be able to provide everything, but we want to get an idea what is the demand, what is the need, and what's the wish and thoughts of you, our audience today. And then we'll share that not only internally, but with other groups and individuals that we are committed to working with. And so for you to get the most out of today, I ask that you share what you are comfortable with, and you see today as a learning experience and a thoughtful experience, and to see, hear, and experience the day as openly as you can. In addition, please be respectful of people's lived experiences and listen with compassion. So as we'll be dealing with some very sensitive and deep and meaningful and heavy issues, for some people, this can be quite emotional. We have a room upstairs. It's accessible via the stairs and the lift for anyone who wants a time out. You are welcome to use that at any point throughout the day. And we also have Halima. She's here. Yeah. She's outside. She was on the desk. As if you need a person of contact to speak to, she's able to be that person. So if any triggers come up for you. Okay, so let's get into this. I'd like to introduce you, and I'm very honoured to introduce you to Dr. Ghazala Anwar. On a personal note, she's a very wonderful person who I've known for nearly 20 years. And on the professional note, she is a doctor and academic of Pakistani and American scholarship in Islamic studies. She has taught in various universities in the US and New Zealand, including a semester at the International Islamic University in Islamabad. She's currently Associate Professor of Quranic Studies at Star King School for the Ministry. Her focus has been on feminist, queer, inclusive, and animal-inclusive contemporary readings of the Quran, informed both by modernist and Sufi Muslim, as well as contemporary Western approaches to reading the Quran. She identifies as a non-sectarian Muslim whose personal journey in Islam has been guided by Sufi practices. In 1998, she was the first Muslim academic in North America to assert publicly that Islam and homosexuality were compatible, and quoted as such in the New York Times, and reported at the Al-Fatiha conference, where she also led a mixed-gender Jummah service. In 2003, she led a mixed-gender Jummah service in Toronto at the Salam conference. In the Jummah khutbah, she encouraged the Toronto queer community to organize its own Jummah services, which led to the Al-Tawheed Jummah Circle formation. In 2015, she was invited to some work in Indonesia by myself and my colleagues that were working on gender and sexuality in Islamic contexts. And she is also the mother of queer Muslim movement in the West. Rizala Noor.
Good morning. First question is, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. So if I move a little, can you still hear me? Yes. Okay, great. So at least we've established the first basis condition for communication. I have written, when I was asked to write about this, I was asked to comment on the story of Lot, and I found myself being, or Lut, and I found myself being resistant. And subsequently, in the process of writing it, I actually have become quite open to the story. I wanted to start to give you a basic, what shall I say, that I engage with the Quran. I've done that all my life. I struggled with it, fought with it, thrown it out, came back, now it throws me out. So I have a very living and passionate relationship with the text. The text is in Arabic, and I have written some of it here. It's not to intimidate anybody. You don't have to know Arabic to know God. But as Muslims, because of the way our faith and the tradition goes, we have a certain anchor in the text of the Quran. So a little bit of Arabic is should not intimidate you, and it won't hurt you. And there's some particularities about the language that you will come to, inshallah, appreciate by the end of this class. So we started this today with the Fatiha, Al-Fatiha, and the Fatiha starts with the Basmallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. If you're Muslim, you know this. If you don't know anything else. And I've written it up there, and it means, in the name of Allah, the most loving, the most compassionate. And this is an invocation that we make at the beginning of every act, or we're supposed to. And this is also how we start and begin reading the Quran. In the Basmallah is both a hope and a commitment. We are invoking Allah's mercy, Allah's love, Allah's compassion, and in the same breath, we are also committing ourselves to the same. We cannot ask for mercy and then, we cannot begin an act by asking for Allah's mercy and hoping for it, and then do something cruel, right? We can, and that's very well. We see that very well. Our tradition is very aware of it. So when we go to slaughter an animal, we don't invoke Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. We say, Bismillahi, Allahu Akbar. Anyway, that's a different talk. It's not this talk. But I'm just saying that if one said Bismillahi, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, one could no longer continue with the intention of slaughtering an animal. That's the power of Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. And it's right there in clear sight, but a lot of times we're not connected with it. So when we recite this Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, to read the Quran, to understand it, to interpret it, to establish it amongst ourselves, our interpretations have to reflect the compassion and love and mercy of Allah. Right? We don't start the Quran by reciting Bismillahi Allahu Akbar. We say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And this is a general bias of the entire tradition, which I get very shocked that we miss sometimes. And so because human beings forget, and we forget the Basmallah, we forget what the Basmallah means, it is reinforced in some very striking ways in the text of the Quran. And one of the phrases that I never get over is the phrase Kataba ala nafsihi rahma. He, meaning God, wrote compassion upon himself, which means Allah bound himself by the law of compassion. That's the only word that Allah wrote upon himself. Now, I think later in the afternoon there's going to be talk on gender, but just look at the composition of this, and that's why I keep the Arabic. It should be a friend, it should be a resource, it should be a consolation. So kataba is masculine, right? The verb is masculine. Allah is neutral, it means upon. Nafs is feminine. This is the pronoun, and that's again masculine. And Rahma is feminine. So you see, you have feminine, masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine. In just this phrase. This is the gender fluidity of Arabic grammar. And the text of the Quran does amazing things with it, especially when it's talking about the most sexist acts of the mushrikun. It assigns male gender to the female child that they're going to bury. So this flipping of gender at very critical times, when it's talking about the shirk of sexism, or the shirk of sexism as associated, when gender becomes an idol, a god besides God. So anyway, we can't go there today, but it's in the Arabic. Once we translate it, we miss this gender fluidity of the language. We miss this gender balance of the language, right? So this is God committing itself to live by the law of compassion. Just like we say, we're going to be entering Ramadan soon, Kataba alaykum as-siyam. Written upon you is the fasting. So when you write something, it means a lot. It's writing, it's a level of commitment. It's a level of commitment that becomes one's nature, in a way. Then the Quran itself, so this is a statement about God. Then the Quran itself is described as rahmatan lin-nas, that it is a mercy for all people. So this is foregrounding before we enter the story of Lut. So the Quran, if the Quran is described as mercy for all people, the story of Lut is also a mercy for us. And what is the mercy in the story of Lut? Inshallah, it's my hope that we might be able to see it by the end of 20 minutes. Okay. And then the prophet, and I know it's the Arabic numerals in Arabic instead of in English, so we can put a 2 here and a 3 here. The prophet's description in the Quran, in Surah Al-Anbiya, is Rahmatan lil Alameen. So there is, right, look at how much this word is being stressed. How can we ever miss it? So it's mercy, compassion, love for all the worlds. It's not just for humans, it's not just for Muslims, but Alameen, for all realms of existence. So how can then all the reports or hadith that we attribute to the prophet must all be true to this description of the prophet in the book. So that's the criteria for me, whether I take a hadith as a guidance or as a basis for my actions or not. Is it true to Rahmatan lil Alameen, which is the description of the prophet in the Quran? Tying the two sources together. So, and then, because we are here to talk about relationships, it is said that God ordained love and compassion. And this is said in a heterosexual context, but I don't think that matters. It's between two people who feel attracted to each other and engage in creating love and intimacy between themselves, that it is ordained. Love and compassion is ordained. And again, you have the same word. So I just say that we need to remember this, and we need to always make it the operative principle as we become as we engage with our faith, as we try to express our faith. And of course, the word, as some of you at least would know, comes from the same root as the word womb. So it has a very feminine association, right? So sometimes it's called the divine feminine grace. So you can see even in this how the masculine and the feminine sort of folds into each other, right? Okay, so these, when you have layer upon layer upon layer of, you're making a layered cake, and every layer has mercy in it, right? See, there's no layer without it. So how can we not bring it when we study the story of Lut? A lot has been written about it because it's what's used to exclude queer Muslims from the Ummah. And I used to feel very alienated by it. But I think it's the London crowd that forced me to find the grace in it. In the story of Lut, there are 3 sins that are described. And one of them, one is a question, which is, do you, masculine, plural, you men, approach with lust, shahwatan, atatunar approached men with shahwa, which lust, instead of women. And that's a great sin. So that's the question that's the central sort of a question, and we look at that question soon. But there are sort of 3 things in various places. There are 3 sins. One is, I guess in this question. And the other is, they say it's gang rape because of how they try to, I guess, make the visitors to the Prophet Lut the objects of their sexual desire, non-consensual sexual desire, which we might call gang rape. And another of their sins that's described is that they cut the ways, which is generally described as highway robbery or things like that. But I think a better understanding of that, which, by one of the members of our community, Mark Brustman, brought that to my attention, is that it refers to the process by which people are made eunuchs, so castration. And it was something that was used in all of, in the Greek world, which is a surrounding and neighboring culture, that, it's it's one of the contexts in which the Quran can be read. And there are actually poems that thank some of the Greek kings who banned that practice. So young boys, before they could mature, pubescent boys were castrated so they could become objects of adult male desire. And so it was obviously the castration was non-consensual, and the relationship, for me, as far as I can say, is non-consensual just because of the huge difference in power between a young person beginning to discover their sexuality and an adult who already knows how to satisfy their lusts. So anyway, and the third sin, let's see, so there was a third one, was that doing munkar, or doing wrong or bad things in their little groups, in their meetings. And that could be castration itself, forcing or, ritually or whichever way, castrating young boys. So they remained effeminate and they remained, attractive to a certain group of people, group of men. And then it could mean, I don't know what it could mean, but that's one of the meanings that could have. It could mean orgies. It could mean just doing something wrong, getting together to do something that's exploitative, that's oppressive, that goes against what a person who's submitted to the truth would do. So in these sins, even though they are being talked about in the context of, in a homosexual context, I read them, I generalize them to any sexual orientation. So it's gang rape, whether it's done by heterosexual men, homosexual men, heterosexual women, homosexual women, is wrong. Even though we might associate this act with a certain gender, certain sexual orientation, but it is wrong. In the same way, predatory relationships with young people who are not yet aware of their own sexuality, who are just beginning to discover their bodies as they become sexual bodies, is wrong. And it doesn't matter what the gender of the young person is and what the gender of the person engaging them in this way is. In the same way, I guess having group sexual activity, which in any case would be devoid of intimacy, because intimacy requires privacy. So if there is any kind of an intimacy, any kind of sexual activity without privacy, it is without intimacy. And so divorcing sexual activity from intimacy is shirk. So I mean, it is shirk because zina, people who commit sexual acts that are blameworthy, are equated with mushrikeen in another place in the Quran. So anyway, are you still with me, or have I lost you? You're here, you're hearing, it's making sense. So what I am basically, first part was, remember, whenever we are reading the text, we must come up with the most compassionate reading. If there's several readings, we have to choose the most compassionate, because we've made a commitment in reciting the Basmalah. Right? We don't say Bismillahi Allahu Akbar, we say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's one thing. So the other thing was that the story of Prophet Lut is not just about the prophet, about homosexuals. It is about transgressive sexual behavior, even though the particular case might be about, might be related to homosexuals. Okay, so the question that is being asked is, do you, I'll use another page for it, then I'll come back to this. And how much time do I have? I have lots of time. Good. So here is the question that is asked. Do you, atatuna, you is masculine, plural, right? Masculine, plural. Approach men with lust instead of women. Right? Do you approach men with lust instead of women? And I think Umar Nuhas here actually does a very appropriate interpretation. Umar Nuhas 20 years ago said this is being addressed to heterosexual men. Because in the case, it is assumed that in the case of heterosexual men, they do not feel any love for men, any erotic love for men, but they can use other men to satisfy their lust. So there's no feelings there, right? The whole overarching world of love does not exist. Only an act, a physical act exists, and some temporary feelings associated with the physical act. So that's one. Now, one of the things that feminists have done, because the Quran is also seen as a very androcentric, which means male-centered, and patriarchal, which means giving men priority and authority. It's seen as a patriarchal and androsexist, androcentric text. So one of the things the feminists have done is said, no, when we use masculine plural, which the Quran uses a lot, that it is not just, it's inclusive of women. So it's not just inclusive of men, right? When it asks you to pray, to establish justice, to keep the trust that you've been entrusted with, even though the language grammatically is masculine plural, it means everyone. So if we do that in the general case, then I'm applying that, I'm transposing it to this question. That this, even though it is addressed, let's say it is addressed to heterosexual men, but we need to generalize it. So I will generalize it here, because we can't just generalize it. That's one of the things that is quite standard. We say when it says establish prayer, and it's talking in masculine plural terms, does it mean women don't have to pray? No, well, and then there are verses that also have very clear gender-balanced descriptions where both men and women are sort of addressed. But anyway, that's still binary, right? There's a whole range of genders between male and female. So where are they in that text? So heterosexual men, let's say, do you, and here the you, I have to do you, and here we can say, again, it's masculine plural, right? Approach men with lust. If it is masculine plural, but it's homosexual men. Those of you who like math would like doing this, right? So this time it's not addressing heterosexual men, because who is it, when it says this, is it talking to, because it's about lust, so it's not just the gender, but it's also the sexual orientation that becomes the relevant context, right? So when it says establish prayer, even though it's using masculine grammar, it is or it's saying fast, it's using masculine grammar, we include women. We say it's a more inclusive thing. But there, because it's talking about an act, fasting, which doesn't have anything to do with sexual orientation, we don't have to add that in there. We just have to add the various genders. But here we'll have to include the various sexual orientations. Is that too complicated? Yes. I see frowns on your faces. Okay. So we back up. The question in the story of Lot is, Atatuna rajala shahwatan dunan nisa. Do you approach men with lust instead of women? Right? So I'm saying this question can only, if we think this is, let's say that we say here too, we can generalize this to women as well. So if we generalize this to women, how would we rewrite the sentence? We would say, do you women approach with lust other women? Do you women approach with lust other men? Do you men approach with lust other women? And we would have to change that depending on the sexual orientation of the person, not just the gender identity, but the sexual orientation. Is that clear? This is the hardest part in the talk. Okay, is it a little clear? A little clear? Because I'm not doing anything that I'm not trying to bend the Quran's arm here. I'm just letting you experience some of its vastness that opens up. Yes, so there is a question. We have a question and answer session, but let's try to work through this, or we can just forget it. I mean, it's the London crowd, I'm told, that insisted we have to talk about the story of Lot. And all I'm saying is that the story is about certain kind of sexual behavior that does not match up with the person who's trying to live a life of faith and submission to Allah and service to others. And it is not just about homosexual relations, it's about a certain kind of sexual behavior. So I'm trying to get to that. Maybe I should leave it for questions and answers. Just for now, say that the question is asking a person who does not feel attracted towards, or who does not feel love towards another person, but are engaging them for satisfying their sexual appetite because it's convenient, because they can do so. Right? They have the power to do so, or because the society allows them. So a gay man who feels no attraction to, no love for, cannot feel close to a woman, but still gets married and uses her for his whatever sexual satisfaction. He's doing that, and we could ask him the same question. Are you approaching a woman with lust instead of a man? Because his heart is not in it. He's not fully involved. He can never become vulnerable to this woman because he doesn't have those feelings of vulnerability for women. Okay, so I guess, let's go and look at some of the values. And then we might come back. If you're interested in sort of pursuing that line, so I'm leaving the other ways you could ask this question. The question is, are you approaching someone, regardless of your gender identity, with lust for whom you feel no love or responsibility or care? That's the question, okay? So regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, the question is about lust instead of love. That's the issue. That's also at the center of that question. And if you use the structural analysis where in the Quran and in other Semitic literatures, the core is at the center. So the crux is shahwa, the crux is lust, and the crux is not the gender identity of the people. So we've taken the lust, this is the word shahwa. Do you approach men with lust instead of women? So the question is it okay for you to approach women with lust instead of men? Is it okay for you to approach anybody with lust? And from my point of view, no, it's not okay, because you're objectifying them. And what happens in a lot of our traditional writings, that women are completely objectified, right? Even in Sufi writings, you go to them like you go to the bathroom, and you're done with your need, like you have an urgency to go to the bathroom, you have an urgency to have, whatever, sex, go to them, but don't get attached to them, and then, get out of there as soon as you can and come back into a male world and a male understanding of what it takes to get close to God. So I would ask that whole tradition, are you approaching with lust women? Because you're objectifying women. And that's wrong. And that's wrong according to my understanding of what the Quran is trying to get us to, focus on or understand. So let's come back to these values. There are some positive values as a person of faith. And it's obvious that they're positive, but I'm still writing it up there. As a person of faith, there are some positive values that we see in the Quran that we want to manifest or experience in our relationships. So one is love, another is compassion, and another is trust. So engaging someone physically in an intimate relationship makes yourself and the other person very vulnerable. So it has to be in the context of trust. And the word amana is actually in its root form connected with the word iman, which means faith. So if you're a faithful person, you're a trustworthy person. If I am a trustworthy person, I will be trustworthy in all my relationships, including sexual relationships, intimate relationships. So this is, and on the other hand, the negative values that we should avoid, and these are both terms that we get from the story of Lot. One is lust, right? And I know this would be, for those of us reading feminist writings, lust, we were trying to revive lust because women had been just used to satisfy male lust to such an extent that there was never ever talk of women ever having any desire or lust. So the lust had become a positive word. But that's why I keep the Arabic. And the word shahwa is used consistently as a negative term, except when you get to heaven. But there it's ishtiha, whatever you desire. But in this world, we have to be very careful that in desiring something, are we stepping on another person? Is this desire coming out of her selfish ego? Is it going to be at the expense of another one? I mean, and that one, for me, can be non-human Muslims, because animals are also Muslim according to the Quran. It can be the earth. That are we fulfilling our desires at an expense of another? And so that's what shahwa means. That's what lust means. There is this aspect of selfishness in it. That someone else is paying the price for your momentary gain. And the other word, and this is the word khiyana, which is the opposite of amana, right? So these two are opposites. And mawadda and rahma is the opposite of shahwa. So these two, love and compassion, are the opposite of lust, and amana is the opposite of khiyana. So khiyana, where did I get this word? How did I come to find this word, this term, as a key term. This is what is associated with the wife of Lot, Lut. In Arabic, Lut, in English, Lot. So the wife of Lot in Surah 66, she's just mentioned along with the wife of Noah as being from among the Khainin. And we don't know. I mean, we can read the Hebrew Bible has an understanding of what her problem was, that she looked back, so she was turned into a pillar of salt. But from the point of view of the Quran and from the point of view of Rahma, that sort of a fickle behavior cannot, invoke God's wrath that easily, a God that's written compassion upon himself. So if she had been a good wife, a good mother, a good partner, just because she looked back when the people of Lut were being destroyed, that doesn't seem, to me, it's not convincing, and it's not in the text of the Quran, so I can choose to sort of let it go. Okay, so, but she is described as from amongst the Khainin. And she's, and there's also good positive examples for all who believe. So this is Surah Tahrim, this is Surah 66, and it's an interesting surah where all the believers are given examples of two women as positive role models and two women as negative role models that should not be followed. And the wife of Lut alayhi salam is one of them. And their problem, wife of Lut and the wife of Noah, was khiyana, was a betrayal of trust. And this betrayal of trust is the trust between the two people, and it's also the wider amana that we carry when we take the shahada, right? So I would say that khiyana and lust go together, and these three go together. And even though we may not know the exact details, but what that has done in that one word has given us the correlative quality with lust, which is khiyana. And I only have 5 more minutes. And in these 5 minutes, I would like to say that the most important context, because we talk a lot about the context in which we read the text, and especially a sacred text, especially the Quran, the most important context, and my definition of sacred text is that the most relevant and important context is the existential concerns of humans. So that their existential concerns, their inner fears and aspirations and ultimate questions are addressed in a sacred text. And this is why sacred texts tend to remain relevant over long centuries, because human beings, in some sense, have not gotten over their fear of death, their question of what is going to happen to us after death, their need for love, their tendency to blow up and get angry and get insecure and jealous. All of it is all here still with us. We did not leave it behind with the once we entered the digital age. So that is why sacred texts will come with us. And so because the most important context is our own existential experience, also as we grow, as we commit to learning and understanding ourselves more, we will have a better ability to understand the Quran more. And this is actually, you might have heard the saying, know thyself, know God. Man arafa nafsa, arafa rabba. Like whoever knows themselves knows God. And so by extension, the more we are aware, there is a term also for it, muhasaba, the more we are actually honestly aware of what's going on with ourselves, what is happening in our inner realities, the more we'll be able to engage with the Quran at its deeper levels of meanings. And I think I'm done with my time, and the rest of the conversation will go on in the question and answer session. Thank you.
So we've got quite a bit of time for the Q&A. We've got approximately 40 minutes. Yeah, we've got lots of time. But I'm going to take up some of that time as chairing the conversation by asking the first one or two questions. You started talking about the ethics of trust and compassion and its opposites. Could you perhaps say more in terms of the theology of ethics and law, and when you began the conversation around Rahman and compassion, and how do we turn the theology into a way of ethics and values that we live by?
Okay, so I think that there is, I was talking about, for us, the way we have understood the Quran, understood our tradition, the way our tradition has organized our understanding of faith and practice for us. There are the 5 pillars, right? Everybody knows what the 5 pillars are? Yes? And I have to say that we have to appreciate that this is a very apt and succinct summary of our faith. And again, each of the pillars is something that continues to deepen infinitely our practice of prayer, and prayer that becomes meditation, prayer that becomes ascension. It's something that is a lifetime's practice and aspiration. So it's just like you may want to climb Mount Everest, and the practice you need for it to get the prayers that can shift us into certain meditative modes. It takes a lot of constant, uninterrupted practice. So anyway, we have the 5 pillars, right? So that I also want to say and highlight that the queer movement has, and none of the other movements within Islam have ever challenged any of these pillars. We don't say that, Salat is irrelevant now, or we don't need to fast during Ramadan. We may, in our own personal practice, we may not be able to observe these pillars, but we see them as as important pillars on which our faith rests. So we have no disagreement there. Our disagreement is very minute, or our sort of difference is very minute compared to what we share with the rest of the ummah. Because if we share the 5 pillars, we share 99% of our understanding of the faith. And I here again emphasize that. But then generally we say for anything, if we're making any arguments, and we have to make them from the Quran or the Sunnah, right? That if you, for anything to be Islamic, you have to bring your argument from the Quran or the Sunnah. And I just gave you a basis from the Quran, where I am saying that one method is you pick anything, you pick 3-5 words from the Quran, and that in itself becomes normative. That we all, because we consider the Quran to be a sacred text, so everything, each and every word in it has the same sort of authority. But the other is to prioritize some of the Quran over other. And this prioritizing has happened throughout history, and it happens in the Sunnah, it's in the Hadith itself. Now, this is Hadith is a record of the Sunnah. So Hadith is not equal to Sunnah, right? We are having this meeting here. Somebody might be taking notes, and some of those notes then in some way, maybe some of them correct, some of them incorrect, some of them out of context, might be preserved. So that would be a Hadith or a report of what happened here. So Sunnah of the Prophet or the earliest community, there are reports about it. So hadiths are the reports. So not every hadith, just because it's being seen as a hadith, becomes authoritative for us. still has to go through lots of various kinds of critical testing. And for me, one of the most critical tests is, does that concur with the description of the Prophet in the Quran, Rahmatan lil Alameen? And if it doesn't, then it doesn't have the same authority for me. And anyway, so in the same way in the Quran, for example, there is a hadith that says that everything has a heart, and the heart of the Quran is the Yasin, Surah 36. And there's another hadith that says that if you recite Surah Yasin 10 times, it's like reciting the entire Quran. So in that hadith, Surah Yasin is being given priority in the Quran, right? It's being elevated. In the same way, there is another hadith that says that the Surah Ikhlas, which is only 18 words, and it's Surah 112, if anyone who recites Surah Ikhlas once is like they've recited the Quran, a third of the Quran. So by that, kind of arithmetic, if you recite Surah Ikhlas 3 times, you get the same benefit as if you recited the whole Quran. So in a way, Surah Ikhlas is seen to have a lot of weight. It is seen to preserve a core teaching of the Quran, which is Tawheed. So that, and Tawheed is one of the 3 core teachings. So you see how these things actually all fit together. So because there are some surahs that are elevated, so there is another hadith which says that the heart of the Quran is Surah Yasin, and the heart of the Surah Yasin is Salamun Qawlum min Rabbir Rahim. Peace is the word from your most gracious Rabb or sustainer. Salamun Qawlum min Rabbir Rahim is actually the heart of the heart. So Al-Ghazali, and he has a book called Jewels and Pearls of the Quran. In that he says, because the Nabi has done this, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so following the sunnah of the Nabi, I am also sorting the verses of the Quran into jewels and pearls. So this is quite a brilliant move. I'm not a follower of Al-Ghazali in everything, but here I think he contributed something brilliant. But it's actually, this is what we do. We all have passages in the Quran that we go back to. They're our go-to place. Like, okay, so surah, the verse of throne, Ayatul Kursi, it is given priority. So we have these special passages, and Al-Ghazali calls them the jewels. And then the jewels describe Allah in Allah's self. Al-Fatiha, for example, is called Miftahul Quran. It's the key to the Quran. It's in a category by itself. Surah Ikhlas, Surah 112, is in a category by itself. So these are, if you don't know and can't know all of the Quran, just hang on to these few, and they are still enough for you to hope for and get the guidance that you would get. So becoming a scholar of the Quran and knowing a lot of the Quran is no guarantee that you are anywhere ahead of others. Right? So Al-Ghazali has these jewels which describe Allah in Allah's self. So the verses that would be is like verse 255 of Surah 2. These are the jewels. Surah 2, verse 255, which is the verse of the throne. It's called Ayatul Kursi, right? And since you have your phones here, you might be able to pull these up. And another one is the verse of light, Surah, Ayatul Nur. And so there are verses, and then there are some surahs that are core, or that have an elevated place even within the Quran. And for Al-Ghazali, these jewels, and then the pearls are verses that describe the acts of the mu'minun. Those that Allah loves, those that Allah approves of, those who give charity, those who establish prayer, those who are steadfast in times of great difficulty. Now, these are the verses that always inspire us, so we naturally go to them anyway. So those are the pearls. After that, Al-Ghazali says, for example, and I think there's a lot of wisdom here. He says, now when Allah is describing the non-believers, why are you interested in it? You are a believer. That's between them and Allah. You don't have to focus on those verses. In the same way, you don't have to, if you are not committing the sins of shirk and all the other things, you don't have to worry about the verses about hell. Then, because you're not going that way. If you were going that way, if I was going to the North Pole, I'd have to worry about the cold there. But my orientation is to the south or to the east or something. So anyway, that's Al-Ghazali's very pragmatic advice. And he says, after jewels and pearls, you don't need to worry about the rest of the Quran. Okay. So I can give you I can share this advice with you, and I think it's a good advice. And he said that those who go for the verses that apparently are about law and who want to become jurists, they are looking for power in the community. And certainly jurists have power, right? He says, but if you're a seeker unto Allah, you don't have to go there either. Of course, follow the 5 pillars, keep your duties, be truthful, speak the truth, be honest, be loving, be trustful, and then focus on the jewels and the pearls. And the jewels and the pearls are not that much. I don't know, in terms of percentage, maybe they're 10-15% of the entire mushaf. And so I'm saying that in order to come with the ethics, so by the way, the story of Lut does not make the cut. It's not a jewel of the Quran because it's describing an act or actions of people that has no positive value, but it has a positive value in warning us. And in the same way, it's not a pearl and it's not a jewel. So I would say the first thing for everybody is to really get in bed with the jewels and the pearls. Really soak up the jewels and the pearls, and after that, a way will be shown to you on what to do with the rest. Or to not do anything, because if you can get what you need from just 3 verses from the Quran, don't worry about the rest. Right? Why are you worried? So a lot of times, those who pursue the study of the Quran are doing it for their personal power over others. So the way we try to avoid that is to commit ourselves to the Basmallah, to Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, to saying we are reading this text focused on Allah's mercy, Allah's love, Allah's compassion, and we will only, take from it as normative that does not violate these particular qualities. So that's quite a commitment. Anyway, maybe I went too far with all that, but
no, thank you. I think
right.
that was quite clear.
Yeah.
We're focusing on compassion. We're focusing on the positives of the Quran, and that's really what we all need to utilize in terms of our ethics and practices as queer people or for our queer allies, for them to focus on the positiveness of the Quran.
Yes, and it's a lifetime's work. It's not something we can finish. And I also wanted to add one thing, Tamsila, you said about justice. And for me, justice is the minimum degree of compassion. So it is still compassion. But if you don't even do justice, then nothing that's unjust can be compassionate, right? So anyway, okay.
I've taken plenty of time in that question.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to the room. I'm going to take 3 questions. I'll write them down, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, Ghazala. That's really wonderful, difficult explanation. So just going on from where you finished, often the thing that you get back in your face that shuts down conversation is, well, the gates of ijtihad have closed, so the tradition is the tradition. And your way of talking about the values and the ethics have really help us to prise open that kind of argument. And I was just wondering if you could say any more about sort of dealing with those kinds of comments, or even what Ghazali might have said about the gaze of Ijtihad.
Yes, so... Okay, sure. So I will write them down. Right.
My question is about language and how you mentioned that language is mostly masculine, and I personally have been within my community shifting or like hacking the language, both Spanish and English, to make it more inclusive. And I wonder if there's a similar thing happening, not just from an interpretive point of view, but from the language itself that is shaping reality. So even though we say this masculine includes us all, that sounds really good on paper and we can understand it rationally, but when we go outside, that's not what is happening. So I'm curious as to, is there a shift in language happening, or can it happen in this context of queerness and in Islam? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I was wondering if I could sort of like ask you more about your assertion between like intimacy and I guess what you were saying was that it had to be two people in order to have intimacy. Could that be expanded to more than two people as well? And what were your thoughts about that? Thank you.
Okay, so your question is about people, more than two people engaging in sexual acts together. Okay, all right, so maybe that should be opened up to everybody. But I will try to address it in some way.
So if you address the first one about the opposition there is to opening the gates of ijtihad from some circles, from some scholars.
Okay, so one of the things is that the person, Ash-Shafi, is the one who said that the gates of ijtihad are closed. But why do we have to believe Shafi, right? And Shafi himself, he traveled. All these classical scholars, they traveled and learned with various people and in various discussions happening in various parts of the Muslim regions. And one of the things that happened is that every region had its own sort of points of view. And we still have it now, the Chicago school or the French school or whatever of different things. So Shafi, when he was in Egypt, he held one opinion. But before that, when he was in Damascus, he held another opinion. So somebody said, look, you've changed your opinion. He said, yes, that is when I was in Damascus and now I'm in Egypt. So Shafi himself changed his opinions. And I don't know why people believed him. So the reason the gates are closed is because people believed Shafi. It is not a verse from the Quran he's quoting. He's just taking the, he's deciding the gates of ijtihad are closed and people just believe him. No. I think what happened is that people use this because they want to preempt certain conversations. And so we should not blame Shafi. He didn't say everybody has to believe me or follow me. Now, he was giving his opinion. And the other thing is that, for example, in the Shi'i thinking, the ijtihad never stopped. It's only in certain areas it stopped. So I think that the blessing in being a minority is that we have to, whatever kind of minority we might be, we have to make ourselves so strong on the inside because the outside world is hostile, right? And that's a true blessing because we are given, Allah decided that we were strong enough to accept the challenge. So Allah gave us a challenge. So we should appreciate the beauty. It's a way, it's like, if we are a diamond in the rough, all the difficulties are the blade with which we chisel our diamond into a well-cut diamond. So anyway, so that's what I have to do with ijtihad. In some communities, it never closed. And other communities, you have to, especially those who don't even follow Shafi. For example, I don't think this happened in the Hanafi school anyway. And there is, for example, I don't think there is any ijtihad that's needed in the case of the 5 pillars, right? Although a lot of us would really like a religion in which you don't have to get up at dawn. But once you start getting up at dawn, you see the good that comes from it. It's a discipline, right? So we don't want to sort of make the religion so it just becomes easy for us. But there are some demands that we can put on it. Okay, yeah.
Ghazala, can I just ask you to briefly define ijtihad for those who don't know
Okay,
what that
sorry.
is?
So, actually, let's take a whole page for it.
Maybe we only have a minute.
All right, but still, so what I want you to see is, if you see ijtihad, right? So it's from the same root as jihad. Do you see? Do you see the jihad in the ijtihad? And the root is jahada, which means struggling. So he says you don't need to struggle anymore. Everything has been completely decided. Everything has been thought. You just have to follow. Now, who would accept that? And now, of course, there's been huge discussions, and the gates of ijtihad are wide open now anyway. Okay, so that's the root. So I guess my 1 minute is over. But ijtihad means the way it's, I guess one can say, creative thinking. I don't know how to do it. But exerting oneself in bringing about new understandings. I think exerting oneself to bring, to answer new questions that arise with new contexts, if such a thing happens, right? So that's what I would call ijtihad. But it was always used. In fact, scholars are trained to be mujtahids. And in the Shi'i tradition, they call them mujtahid, because they have to continuously make relevant a tradition which is now at least centuries old, if not millennia old, to this moment. And that is where ijtihad is required. Okay.
So the second question we had was about language.
Language, okay. Yes, so you see, that's why, I mean, I am a lover of Arabic. I can very safely say that. So for human beings, for the person, there are 2 words used in Arabic. One is nafs and one is insan. Right? Nafs takes all feminine grammar. Kataba ala nafsihir rahma, his self. Nafs means self. It also means person. It can mean, some people translate it as ruh, as soul. And insan, you can just say human being. A human being, and it includes, so when we say human, so it includes male and female, but it takes masculine grammar. Nafs is used in the Quran to refer to human beings at least 3 times more than insan. So you think of it at the individual level, the Quran, when it addresses humans, is addressing them more in feminine terms. So, for example, there's this beautiful verse, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutmainna, O ye tranquil soul, idkhili ila rabbiki, irja'i ila rabbiki radiyatam mardiya. Return to your Lord, your sustainer, pleasing and pleased, well-pleasing and pleased, right? Udkhuli fi ibadi wa udkhuli jannati. Enter you my servants and enter you my Jannah. my garden. All of this is feminine grammar. So does it mean that only women enter the garden or are asked to enter the garden? No, obviously. What you see also, the beauty of it is that there are a lot of shrines where male saints are buried, have this verse inscribed on them. Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutmainna, O ye tranquil soul. And it's all feminine. So we have to focus on the grammar and see where it is leading us. So what some people, one way to understand this is that when it is talking about a human being's inner realities, it uses feminine terms. When it is using about a person's outer realities, it uses insan instead of nafs. So Allah wrote Rahma on Allah's inner self, on Allah's nafs, right? So also the other beautiful things about the word nafs is that because it means self, this word is used for Allah and for human beings. The word nafs. Because it's, where insan is insan, it's human beings. Does that try to answer your question in some way? Right.
Do you include language that is neutral or in a way more inclusive?
Okay, so there is no neutral in Arabic. Alhamdulillah, I say. Okay, so if you use for the same person is referred to sometimes in masculine terms and a lot more times in feminine terms. What are you doing with gender there? So, and every human being can be assigned masculinity or femininity, right? So you detach, what I call this the gender fluidity. So for me, each human being is a unique combination of maleness and femaleness. But we take on certain genders. But if we want to decide, no, this is not a good representation of my inner reality, so there is a place also for people being males and females. There's also a place for people being something in between, because each individual has both maleness and femaleness. And when I was talking to someone who's a scientist about this, they said that actually all of us have male and female chromosomes, and I don't know I don't know the science of it, but there's a lot of maleness and femaleness in us. That's all I can say. But for me, this word nafs is so important because it's a feminine word. And of course, the Sufis always focus on inner realities. And the inner realities usually are spoken of in feminine terms. And Iman, faith, is an inner reality. It's not an outer reality, right? We express our faith in various ways. It is supposed to be apparent from our actions. But the heart is hidden, and faith inside the heart is hidden. So anyway, I don't know if it answers this, but I'm quite happy. So I think that the encouragement is for people to use, to use a varied gendered language when referring to themselves and to others, because the Quran does that. The same, and I say that the most striking part is that when it's talking about how girl children are discriminated, it uses masculine gender for them. It uses the masculine pronouns when exactly where it is talking about that. And so one place is in Surah Zukhruf, which is Surah 43. Another place, for example, is 16. Surah 16, and it's talking about burying this child who is a feminine child. And the language is, should I bury him or should I not bury him? That's the Quranic language. But the whole question is, the reason the father wants to bury the baby is because it's a female baby. So that complexity and playing with gender and its fluidity. I think that we can do a whole 1 week on it. Anyway.
So what I'm taking from that is that from the Arabic and from the Quranic Arabic, we can use the different genders, not essentially interchangeably, but it just shows how gender is not fixed.
It's not fixed.
And that's within the Arabic. And that's been more so historically. I think in recent times, in the modern Muslim world, we have decided to fix gender. We have decided to fix the language. So that's been the shift. The historical context was a lot more fluid, as you said, and a lot more open. And it's the modern practice of Muslims that has made it more fixed.
Yes, and one thing that comes from the traditional societies is, for example, the transgender can be transgender, and they can also be, and they can be out in public places as transgender in Pakistan, and nobody has any comments on it, right? We have one thing that you have to be, like if they come to your door, if they come to your door to beg, that you have to give them something. And you have to be nice to them. Those are but I think in that is the recognition that as babies, they are given away. They do not get raised by their biological families, but the alternative family that raises them is a very strong community and very well organized with its own ritual, with its own hierarchies or whatever you want to call them, and traditions for caring for each other. Okay, so
I think we get the third question was, can intimacy involve more than two people?
Okay, so...
I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah, my answer is I don't know. Okay, so that's something, you see, so that would be a question on which we would need to do ijtihad. That would be a question in which we would need to do muhasaba, right? So ijtihad, and there is the muhasaba. Where is this question coming from? Is it coming from lust? Is it coming from love? Is it coming from compassion? Is it coming from a place of commitment? Amana is commitment. So are you there for each other through sickness and through health? Right? Are you there for each other on rainy days and sunny days? Because somehow that is the prerequisite as far as I understand. So I would say, so another word we want to add here is muhasaba. First of all, really do self-examination. Where are these questions coming from? Right? And become a establisher of salah, and then make 2 rakat salah and do istikhara, right? That's our way. That's our way. Because we have to sync everything with our faith and the practice of our faith, and the fact that we have taken on the trust, the amana of being people of faith, and all the commitments that come with it. So how does it work with your faith and your faith commitment? And then we can go from there. Okay.
So we can take 3 more questions.
Thank you. This is so interesting, especially your focus on the pearls and the jewels. But my question would sort of like go back to the verses about the story of Lot, even though, as you said, it's not necessarily a pearl or a jewel. And your interpretation has been really interesting, and it shows mercy in the way it's expanded our way of looking at it. My question is, in the story, the town gets destroyed for these particular sins. How does that include, or how does that make sense for asexual individuals or children, or let's say non-human animals, plants in that area that were destroyed as well. If the sin was approaching someone through lust being defined in a way which is harmful use of sexuality, hurting somebody, using them in a way which is harmful for them as a weapon, basically, as a weapon. So how does that apply to children or asexual individuals? Why were they punished? For instance, if, what would be a merciful reading of this story that makes sense of the punishment that came on that town?
Okay. So, yes, so your question is about terrible punishment, right?
Yeah. You spoke about masculinity and femininity, and I wanted to know the Quran talks a lot about being with a woman, having child with a woman. Half your deen is complete when you get married. I just want to know what you've got to say about that in regards to homosexuality.
Okay, so okay, I'm trying to remember, so I'm going to say half of deen.
Thank you so much for your talk. First question being, you talked about sort of elevating certain parts of the Quran, and especially you started with Bismillah as a way of approaching the Quran in the first instance with justice. Particularly looking at a queer Muslim community, what particular parts of the Quran would you sort of ask us to perhaps prioritize in terms of looking at that, of like starting to look at the Quran with that ethic of compassion and justice beyond the Bismillah, maybe if there are particular verses that we could use? And if I may just quickly, just referring back to the talk and the ayahs pertaining to the story of Prophet Lot, if we have time, is there something, you talked about the grammar of atatuna, and obviously that being all encompassing of different genders and sexualities potentially, but I wondered if you could talk more about the fluidity of the words rijal and nisa and how they maybe constrain that interpretation or broaden it, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. So we go back to the question. Okay. Shall I start?
So yes, the first one was on with the destruction of the city of Lot, of those people. Where is the mercy in the deaths that would have occurred of the plants, of the animals, of children, or those who were asexual?
Yes. So there is the apparent reality and there is the unseen reality, right? So this reminded me of Surah Yasin. In Surah Yasin, there's two people coming to one. People say, no, you're just like us. Then a third person is sent. They say, no, you're just like us, and if you don't stop, we're going to kill you. And a person comes running from the other side of town, which means this is a person who could have kept quiet and kept safe, right? He was not part of this discussion. He was not at that point, but he comes running min Aqsal Medina. So you look at this, he comes running to intervene where these people are saying we're going to kill the prophet. And what happens? He gets killed, right? So in Yasin, it's not said that he gets killed. It says, and it was said to him, Qil adkhulul jannah. It is said to him, enter the paradise. It doesn't say that they killed him and then it was said to him. In the moment that on the outside, these people who were threatening to kill the prophets, kill him, in that moment, his experience is that he's being invited to enter the Jannah. So do you see what's happening on the inside and the outside? So what I'm saying is that death is a transition. So in that transitioning, people there's all kinds of different, I would say, a range of experiences on how people might make that transition, go on the other side. And so just like this person, he came to defend the prophets. And what does he say when he's asked, enter the Jannah? He says, Ya laita qawmi ya'lamun. Oh, I wish my people knew. He's still thinking about his people. He says, wow, look at this. I wish they knew. I wish they knew what they're being called to and invited to by these prophets. So that happens to him, but then the people are destroyed, right? So what I'm saying is, yes, death in itself, when a whole community is destroyed, a culture is destroyed, and death in itself is not a punishment. It need not be, but we don't know what happens. How the death is being experienced by the person who dies. And that's what we see in Yasin. That it can be. So the children, even though the whole way on the outside, everybody got destroyed, but there was an immediate sorting out of what experience the people have when they're dying, or after that moment. That's just one response that one can give to that. And the other thing is, here is where I think the distinction, there is a distinction in 3:7, Surah 3, verse 7. And this is the Quran is called a self-reflective text, which means it talks about itself, it names itself, it talks about what's going on in it. So, whereas a lot of texts don't do that. They don't self-reflect. So the Quran in 3:7 divides. They says in this book there are two kinds of verses. Some are muhkam and some are mutashabiha. So muhkam are established. Muhkam is established, clear. And mutashabiha are not clear. They are metaphorical. So we can say, sometimes people use the word ambivalent, right? It means they are let me say that they're metaphorical, right? Because the word tashbih or metaphor comes from the same root. They're similar. They're so similar that you can't tell if it's one or the other. They share similarities. So one place where everything, all of the descriptions of the hereafter are mutashabiha, right? Because we don't know that reality. All of the descriptions of Allah are also tashbih. So that is why. But I have another way of distinguishing. That's sort of the general way of saying what is established or what is muhkam. So the verse encourages to not go after the mutashabih. It says stick to the muhkam. And say the mutashabih is also from God. So for example, when it says, oh, it'll be a garden and you'll be given fruit. And so, okay, just say, okay, it's a metaphor and just accept it. It's not something you start thinking about, well, is it going to be exactly like the pomegranate here? Is it going to be a little different, right? Because it's a reality. We're talking now about a reality that we have no experience of. So it's in the realm of mutashabiha. The other way that I understand muhkam and mutashabiha is anything that actually makes you doubt your faith, decreases your faith, is mutashabiha. So if you pursue it, you're going to get lost in doubts. So at that time, just stop yourself. Right? There are some lines of questioning that if we go down that hole, we can lose our faith, we can lose our mood, we can lose our life, basically, even. So now this is mutashabih. What is happening to me now? I'm beginning to doubt the basis even of my faith here, or what the basis to which I think my faith is tied. So at that time, it's your mutashabih, leave it alone. And that is what I have said to a lot of people for the story of Lut. It's not for you, leave it alone. It has a purpose for straight people, so let them, straight men, let them read it and take it seriously, right? But for you, it is a mutashabih. If you start focusing on it, you lose your iman. You need to focus on what the verses that resonate with you, that increase your iman, that help you get out of bed and make wudu and pray. Just focus on those. Or go and help someone, right? So those that help you become strong inside. That's the muhkam for you. And those that actually do the opposite, leave them alone. The other thing is that as our understanding grows, what was muhkam becomes mutashabih, and what was mutashabih might become muhkam. So, but there are, at any given moment, there's some things that are mutashabih. So for you, the story of Lut is mutashabih. You don't, God doesn't seem one who has written Rahmah on himself when he goes about destroying this whole land. So it creates a dissonance in you. At that point, it's mutashabih. You don't need to deal with it. Okay. So this is an important distinction. And you can say, this is all mutashabih for me. Because, okay, so it can be that people told us when we were growing up and gave us no way to question it, that we were just told this is a sacred text. And don't you dare say anything against it. But it might be that it's no longer a sacred text for us. So even then that, you need to be honest with yourself. Okay? Because there's no need for you to hang around a text that's not sacred for you. Because inshallah, you'll find one that is sacred for you, that does make sense to you. But it might be that, yes, it is sacred, it is compelling, it does console you, it does guide you, but there are also aspects of it that make no sense to you. So when that happens, leave alone the aspects that don't make sense to you. And always stick with the ones that make sense to you. In the same way, stick with the people that bring out the best in you. And avoid the people that don't do that do the opposite. Stay with people who pray, and if you want to be an establisher of prayer, right? So it's the sohbah. So keep the company of the verses that make sense to you. And keep good company of them. And the rest you can say, inshallah.
So I think this also relates to the second question,
right,
which was how the Quran predominantly talks to heterosexuality, to marriage and children. So,
okay, the thing about half the deen, it's a hadith, right? It's a hadith that you complete half your deen when you get married. And there are many other hadiths that don't and there's hadiths about, celibacy is not, you will see different people quoting different hadiths. So there's people who quote, there's people, the Sufis, like, who was I reading recently? The Sohrawardiya, they quote a hadith that after 2 years, which means the Prophet is quoted as saying, that after 2 years after I'm gone, celibacy will become halal for you. So God knows what that means. Because a lot of Sufis did practice celibacy, right, for long periods of time. And so they needed to have a hadith to be able to do that, so there is a hadith. So what I see as half the deen is that the people establishing close, trusted relationships and taking care of those, your half of your commitment is to the people, to your immediate family, however that family looks like, right? Heterosexual, or whatever the configuration is in terms of sexual orientation, gender, whether they're related to you by blood or not, it doesn't matter. But whoever is in your closest circle, they deserve at least half of the efforts that you're making for Allah, would be made to serve them, to take care of them, to be there for them. So in terms of children, the Quran is very neutral. It doesn't say be fruitful and multiply, as Genesis does. It says to some Allah gives children and to others Allah doesn't give children. And it also says that the children are a bala. They are, they test you. They are a test. And a lot of times, in Taghabun it says that amongst your family are your enemies. So be fazuru, so be warned. But then it says, so make peace with them and take care of them. But be aware that they're your enemies. So that means enemies of your deen. They can distract you from your deen. Yeah? They can take you in a completely different direction. So there is actually, even though there is injunction of taking care of kin and those close to you, there is no priority on blood relations or in having children even. It doesn't say that a person who doesn't have children has less opportunities of entering Allah's grace and Allah's pleasure. These are all tests of this world, in the same way as wealth. Wealth can be a test, it can be a bala, or it can be good if you're using it for good purposes. Yeah. So that one of that nikah is when you make a nikah, you complete half of your deen. You can understand it as a nikah with another individual. It doesn't have to be a straight nikah. And now, of course, there are many ways of having children as well, right? So it doesn't have to be in a heterosexual marriage. Not now, but all through history, that's been the case.
So this will have to be the final question because we are out of time. The question initially was, which part of the Quran do you recommend for reading on compassion?
Okay, so first, for most of us, we need to choose a translation because a lot of us don't know Arabic. So in choosing a translation, choose a translation that flows for you, because different translations will speak to different people. It has to be a language you're comfortable with. Then the second thing is, remember it's a translation. So whenever you get stuck somewhere, consult a few other translations. So you will see that, you will say, oh, is this the same verse they're translating? That's one thing, but translations are still fine. I would just say, first of all, that I would say you have to come up with your own selection, but there are the end of the Quran, the surahs in the end of the Quran, the verses, the passages that you see quoted all the time, the passages that get recited in prayers. Actually, making selections, preferred selections for daily devotional practices has been part of the culture for a very long time. And Al-Ghazali didn't do something new. He just sort of gave he justified it in a more scholarly way, this practice. But there are, for example, in Pakistan, there are these pansuras. So there's 5 surahs that my mother recites every day, and she also recites a part of the Quran, but they're Surah Rahman and Surah Yasin. Okay, I would say start with Surah Rahman. Just yeah. And then Surah Rahman and Yasin and Fatiha, and then some of the surahs from the end. Right? Does that answer your question? It's not, and then you'll come with your own favorites. What speaks to you is what is the medicine you need at the time. So just work with that, yeah.
Thank you. I know there's a lot more burning questions, and there was a second part to your question. I suggest we try and catch Ghazala in the breaks and the lunch when she's had some food and tea, and we can ask her there. For now, thank you very much, Ghazala. Thank you all for your questions. Okay, so we're now having a break, and then we've got workshops. So hopefully you'll know where you're going, but just a quick reminder, and I'll be corrected if this has changed since the print. So in the hall, we have Black Lives Matter and queer liberation. In the theatre, we've got intersectional activism, queer Muslims and coalition building. In the cafe, it's talismans. And upstairs, we've got forgotten his, her, their stories, trans activists of colour. Okay. Enjoy your break.